Thank you. And thank you, Tom, for doing this for so many years in a row. I just think it's really important. And if you guys can find a way to thank Tom, make sure that you do that, please, because he does this for the betterment of the industry, which we love. So yes, we're gonna jump right in. Here we go. Data, metrics, ROI, alignment, research. I'd love to hear some other terms in the chat that you've heard or that you say and people in L&D tend to run, right? These are the kinds of words that inspire people to take off running in the other direction or go, ugh, I don't want to talk about that, right? Learning analytics, KPI, oh, that's a really good one, right? Measurement, effectiveness, evaluation, efficiency, right? All of these words carry such weight, and we have a certain thing that we think about, a certain perspective that we bring with us when we talk about these words. And what I want to do today is I want to make it simpler, okay? So here are some ground rules, if you will, for our conversation here today, because I want this to be really interactive. I want people in the chat sharing ideas. I want, in addition to the ideas that I'll be sharing, us to kind of have a brainstorming session here, right? But I want us to first shift the perspective from which we typically think about data, right? I want us to think about it so much more simply, right? A lot of times we think that it's scary. There's Excel spreadsheets involved and numbers, but I want you to think for a minute, and I don't want anyone to respond because this is a very personal, private thing, but I want you to think, did you take some sort of vital sign this morning when you woke up to help inform your day, whether that's blood sugar, blood pressure, heart rate? Did you look at your sleep metrics from last night? Think about that for a second. If you did, that was data that you collected to make a decision, right? Using the emoji reactions, your emoji reaction of choice. How many of you are wearing some sort of fitness tracker right now, if you're comfortable sharing that? An Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something. Look at all these thumbs up, right? What you're doing when you use one of those is you are collecting data to make decisions, right? Who here looked at the weather either on an app, on the news, or stuck their head outside when they went to let the dogs out, which is how I typically check the weather? See, exactly. Again, that is data that you are collecting to make a decision, right? It doesn't have to be scary. It's all around us. It's just the information that we use to tell a story, right? And for the purposes of this conversation today, I want to invite us all to go beyond score and metrics, right? So today, let's table and let's not talk about, just for this session, let's not talk about assessment scores, smile sheets, or satisfaction surveys. And please, let's not talk about course completions, right? Let's talk about other things that we can look at and measure to look at the impact of what our learning projects are doing, right? I'm not saying that there's not a place for that data. I'm just saying we know that exists. Most of us are already using that in some way, shape, or form. Today, I want to talk about going beyond that, right? And then I want us to also think very seriously about the learning outcomes, rather than thinking about the conversation today in terms of solutions, design, or tools that we might be using. I want us to think about the outcome, not the objectives, not the finite things of when you leave this session, you will, right? No, I'm talking about the outcome. What is the overall goal? What is the reason that we're getting this training request in the first place, right? Is it to increase sales, increase leadership effectiveness, decrease accidents, right? Those are the outcomes. Like, what is that overarching goal? So I want us to think in terms of that too. So now that we've kind of set the tone, let's talk about where in our organizations we can find data, right? Where is it hiding, right? And so I have 3 specific examples here, but I want to hear so much more in the chat where you find data within your organization. And all of these things you'll notice overlap in really interesting ways. So Other departments, right? Yes, there is data. HR, right? Let's start at the top. HR. They're collecting things like performance data, succession, talent, employee engagement, exit interviews, job descriptions, task analysis. Yes, performance evaluations, turnover, retention, right? Exactly. What kind of talent are applying to roles even? In the IT department, they're monitoring where people are going in the organization, right? They're monitoring who's using what software, how often they're using it, for what period of time they're using it. They're also looking at help desk tickets. What are the things that most people need help with? Customer satisfaction scores, right? That's where we get into the sales department, right? Customer satisfaction, sales, churn, customer retention. And our marketing department is measuring how people are coming into the organization or utilizing the organization and how that organization is being displayed to everyone, right? And so they're looking at some really great content metrics that we can borrow from them too, right? Videos, blogs. How do they know who's watching their videos on YouTube? How do they know who's viewing the blogs on the company's website? Every person in the organization, every department is collecting some sort of information. It may not be very well organized, but it exists, right? The point is it exists. Another great spot to find data is your company's intranet. So where everyone goes for information. For some companies, this is SharePoint. For some companies, it's its own special website, right? But one thing that I do when I start a new full-time role anywhere is I spend that sweet, sweet onboarding time where you get 2 full weeks to watch like 5 boring e-learnings with not much else to do in between. I like to spend that time just combing the intranet and figuring out what is it that this company has available in terms of process, in terms of data, in terms of information. Is it really outdated, right? Am I finding a lot of process documents that haven't been updated in years? Because it's also going to give me an idea of what I'm going to be up against in my new learning and development role should I need some of those processes and some of that data, right? We also have so many different tools that are collecting data, even if the departments aren't necessarily using it. If you're using something like Salesforce or an HR system or a performance management system or a help desk ticketing system, those are all digital tools that are constantly collecting data. And last but certainly not least, any sort of observation that's going on in your organization, which also includes observation that you can do yourself, right? So maybe there is a mentoring program. Maybe there is some coaching going on. Maybe those performance evaluations, we're getting some observational data from the different managers and leaders that work within the organization. But we can also do our own surveys, our own focus groups to figure out what's going on, where this request is coming from, and things like that. So just to kind of open the floor to expand you thinking a little bit about who else has data within the organization that I could borrow or use for my purposes, right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to present you 2 separate case studies from my experience. And in these situations, I used non-traditional measurement and evaluation to prove the impact of what the project is that I'm working on. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give you the training request as it was presented to me. And we're going to talk about what would be good ways to evaluate, right? And it might feel a little bit backwards to do, but this is really how we should be approaching learning projects in our organization, is thinking about how we're going to measure from the needs analysis, right? Because a lot of times that outcome, that overarching goal, is going to give us some really awesome clues as to what we should measure in the first place, right? So let's jump right into an example because you'll see what I mean. All right, so my entire team was hired to create an onboarding learning program to help customers of the product that the company sold to be able to use it independently, right? And one of the biggest reasons why they decided that this was necessary after, the company had been running for several years. It was a startup, but it had been around, was because onboarding managers, there were people with the title onboarding manager at the company who were doing one-on-one PowerPoint virtual instructor-led sessions with every single customer separately, right? So part of the reason we were asked to do that, yes, scary face, was to help take some of the work off of them so that they can turn around and help with the more specific use cases, right? And the more custom advanced problems that some of the customers were having. And Jody said, this sounds like an exact ask. Good, that's exactly what I wanted. So how would you measure the impact of something like this? And remember, we're not talking about course completions and assessment scores. Outside of that, what would you look at within the entire organization? And of course, I'll tell you what I actually did. But I want to see some other ideas, maybe some ideas that I didn't even think of, hopefully. Ooh, there's so much. Customer usage and retention, ticket deflection and CSAT, fewer questions and problems, retention of customers, help desk tickets. Perfect. Time and cost. Yes, tickets. So exactly, right? So obviously, one of the first things, numbers of customers on board. Yep, Sean, yeah, of course. Confirmation of customer onboarding. Exactly. So not only did we want to measure, did this save the onboarding manager's time, right? And how we did that was we asked them to, we asked their manager to clock for, I think it might have just been a couple of weeks. We asked him to clock for like 2 weeks in a row because he had 6 different onboarding managers. Clock how many of those one-on-one sessions that they were doing and how many hours that took, right? Over the course of 2 weeks. And then looked at, after we launched the program, how many hours they were still doing those same meetings, right? Because they would have one customer who would request that specific one-on-one attention and time still, but generally it was 100 and some change hours that we saved over the course of a month across all 6 onboarding managers, which I'm not very good at math, but it was something like a whole day a month for each of them, or a whole day a week. But that's not enough, right? Because yes, it achieved the outcome that we were trying to get to, but I mean, we could have just pasted the PowerPoints up on an LMS and called it done, right? But we also want to make sure that the onboarding learning program is actually helpful, right? Measuring the first 90 days of the customer who is onboarded. I don't know if onboardee is a word, but I'm here for it. So looking at things like, now, our VP wanted us to measure completions. And I said, listen, here's why I don't think we should measure completions for our customers, because I want the customer, if they already have some familiarity with our product or a product like it, to come in, and if they just need lesson 5 to do what they need to do, come in lesson 5, take lesson 5 and leave and get in the product and do what they need to do as fast as possible, right? And when I worded it that way, the VP was like, oh, okay, just do the necessary parts. Yes. So all of the courses that we created were completely optional, and people were able to pick and choose which portions of it that they needed for their particular role or what they were trying to achieve with that onboarding, right? Or with the product. And so we looked at the number of users, I think Sean mentioned this, the number of new users that were coming into the LMS to take that onboarding, right? So we looked at that. We looked at how many people were returning, and then we looked at their average session numbers. And those were kind of, very high level metrics. But we did look at help desk tickets. And we, in fact, used the help desk tickets to help us identify where to create content for the learning program itself, right? which lessons, which courses, which parts of the product do we need to cover? Because we don't need to cover everything at the very beginning. We just, needed to understand where people were having the most trouble. And so we used the help desk tickets to find those areas and then created content on them. And then we were able to watch the decline of the help desk tickets after that was launched. And there's a question in chat, was this accompanied by pre-learning to assess the need to test out? No, because we didn't need to assess the knowledge of our customers. We kind of trusted that they would come in and take what they needed to be able to use the product. And if they didn't, then they would, either reach out to their onboarding manager who would direct them back to the learning or something like that, right? So, and most people were pretty self-sufficient once we kind of let them know that education portal existed. Plus, we had a really robust knowledge base as well. So that was already in place when we came in and provided some additional education. But, looking at this problem, all the answers were right there, right? All the answers were in the task that we got. So if we think about evaluation from when we get that request, it's so easy to be able to prove that impact and tell a story, right? And it says the product team could also measure utilization, and time to full usage could be another KPI. And Dan, absolutely. That was kind of where we wanted to get to. And our MVP of the onboarding learning program, we didn't quite need to get to that point, but that's the goal, right? With a more advanced program, and eventually, in several iterations later, where we would have liked to end up, right? That's a great measurement. All right, here's another case that's much smaller, but I wanted to kind of show the full kind of picture of the types of requests that we get. So case number 2, a new system. So we had 500 frontline workers who were working in warehouses all over the United States. And those frontline workers every morning would come in their break room, there was a desktop computer that they would all line up and clock in. And then they would all line up at the end of their shifts and clock out, right? And clock out for meals. And they all did it on the same desktop computer. Well, we had purchased a new HR system. And so the process for clocking in and out was different. The process for requesting time off was different. And one of the parameters that we had to follow, and this is just important because of measurement, right? Was that they specifically wanted people to go out to the warehouses and, as part of everyone's morning stand-up meeting, show them how to clock in and out properly, right? They wanted to train the trainer, and they wanted those trainers in the warehouses helping them before the launch, right? To understand what was coming and how to use it. And so we did that, and we also printed out full color job aids that went in front of the desktop so that people could see in real time as they were clocking in and out a guide if they needed it. It also included that how to request time off, which was something that they weren't using as often, right? So how would we measure the effectiveness of this? Payroll errors. Make a hotspot simulation and test them, right? No, I'm just kidding. Observation, Marina says. That's a really good one. Yeah. Some of the trainers were, the way that we kind of had to plan it out, some of them were there intentionally on the first day at the larger warehouses to be observing and helping people, right? Yes. So comparing the time data, right? Seeing if it fit the learning objectives. Okay. So what we did was quite simple, right? First of all, there's something to be said for qualitative data, right? We haven't really talked about that much here, but sometimes it is as simple as someone saying, yep, we had no problems. this program that you've created or this thing that you've helped us support has been fully adopted, right? And if the stakeholder is saying, yes, it's been fully adopted, then sometimes we can just go, okay, that's good enough. But for this specific one, we did that. We asked the managers how it was going. We asked the trainers who were there on day one how it was going. And what we also did was we talked to the HR admin for the system and had them look at the audit trail, right? There's always going to be mistakes with the time clock. That's just how it goes. But what we were looking for was that there was no significant increase in errors and no significant increase in the managers having to go in and correct, right? And to Dan's point, an employee engagement activity with a leaderboard competition for percent of teams using the new system. These teams didn't use computers. They didn't have anything where they could have looked at, any type of leaderboard, and they just wanted to clock in and out, right? They just wanted to be able to do the thing and do it right without error. And someone said payroll error. So this wasn't connected to payroll. Payroll had their own separate issues with the new system. But what we found was, with the exception of one warehouse that had other technical difficulties with the new system, no one else's clocking process, time clock process, was significantly affected. So we considered that a win. It went off. Like, sometimes the result that you're looking for is like just quiet consistency, right? Like a seamless move from one thing to another. It doesn't have to be exciting. It doesn't have to be engaging, right? Sometimes it's just simply making sure things are running smoothly and going as they should, right? So all this said, let's talk about some of the common obstacles that we see when we talk about evaluation and we try to implement things like this, right? These are probably the things that I hear most often when I talk to potential clients, just people in the L&D world, as to why they're not looking for impact in this way, right? And the first thing I hear is, my company doesn't collect data. I've heard that so many times that there would be so many bankrupt companies if it were true, right? I think really it has to do with our perception and perspective. I try to mix those words into one. I'm making my own words too today. But it has to do with that perspective of data, right? If it's not numbers, if it's not an Excel sheet, we don't see it. Or if it's not under our department, we don't see it. But companies, like we just talked about earlier, are collecting data everywhere. Now, this doesn't mean that you always have unfettered access to that data, right? Sometimes it can be difficult to get what you need. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're just talking about more so the existence of that data, right? But one thing you can do if you have trouble getting that data, right? If it's IT and they're like, why do you need that report? We don't want to give that to you. Well, if they're the ones that requested that training, then we can explain to them, listen, if we can't see the numbers and the evidence behind this problem, we can't really help you fix it. And we can't really know if we've helped you fix it, right? And we can give that pushback where it's like, well, if you want to order a training from the L&D department, then you have to be willing to share your data with us, right? The other thing I hear a lot is, leadership is fine with how we do it. They just want to get it done. Have you ever heard that one before? Leadership is fine. They're okay. They just want us to turn it in and move on to the next thing, right? And when I typically hear this, first of all, it is, especially in the United States right now, it is not the type of job economy that I would want leadership to be fine with anything that I'm doing. I would want them to think that the L&D team is the greatest, most impactful, most beneficial department to have at the company. Because if we're just fine, that means we're like somewhere down here and the great performing teams are somewhere up here. And if it comes time to cut budget, the team that's fine is probably going to be cut before the team that's amazing, right? The other thing is they just want us to get it done. Typically, when I hear this, it usually means that the L&D department or the L&D team has lost a little bit of trust or lost a little bit of reputation within their organization, whether that's because their processes slow them down a bit, they're not quite as efficient as they should be, or they haven't been consistent in showing value and impact in the past. But what I can tell you is that in my almost decade of working in this industry, I have worked with hundreds of subject matter experts and leaders, and I can count on one hand the number of people who said, no, just do it the way I told you and just get it out there. After I've presented, hey, if we look at this number or if we look at these numbers, we can get really good metrics on the impact of this, right? And with those 3 or 4 people who've told me, no, I don't care about that. I just want this PowerPoint done, or I just want this 2-hour HR training to run. Usually that's when I start looking for a new role or a new client, right? Because it's so rare to hear that, right? It's so rare when you tell a good story about your impact that leadership goes, no, we don't want to do it that way, right? And then the last thing I hear often is that we don't have the time or the budget. And in the examples that I just shared with you, I shared those examples specifically because of this specific obstacle, because I didn't need extra time or extra budget in either of those cases to look at the numbers that I was looking at, to measure the impact that I was measuring. And it doesn't have to be that hard, especially when you do it from the beginning like that, and you look at the outcome and you look at those numbers from the beginning. I mean, yeah, of course, we had a massive budget to create a customer education program, but what I'm saying is no additional budget was used in looking at its impact or measuring its effect, right? So just something to think about. And let me wrap it up here. So how do we do this in a way that is a little bit outside the box, right? We start from the very beginning. As soon as that request comes in, look at the request for the clues. Do some Carmen Sandiego detective work and go, okay, what are they really asking here? And why is this a problem, right? I always give the example of someone, I'm sure you've heard something like this, right? We need a 30-minute e-learning for our managers because they're all mean. Well, why do you say that the managers are all mean? Well, we keep getting reports in HR that people are not getting along well with their managers. And we keep hearing it in the exit interviews that people are leaving because of bad managers. And okay, there's 2 data points, right? Who's having these conversations? Where are which departments are those conversations coming from? We don't need to know the specifics of what they said or who it was, but tell us how many complaints we're getting. What departments are they coming from? What does the exit interview data say about retention, right? That's where we can start from the very beginning, that request. And then we can go find the data. And we love to use this term in the nerd world called triangulation, right? Where we try to get multiple data points to paint a better picture of the entire impact. And it's really important for us to do in learning and development too, because first of all, we talked, hey, we can't always get all the data points that we need, right? But if we can get 2 out of the 3 or 3 out of the 4, it's still going to be enough to help us tell that story. And one data point alone is not really going to show the impact, right? Because correlation doesn't actually mean causation, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be that sales has been working harder. It could be that, there's all these other things that are hard or impossible to prove. Exactly, Cameron. If you have multiple data points that tell a story, it makes a super strong case, right? And then the last part is telling that story and being able to tell that story without all the learning and development jargon in a way that leaders and other people can understand, right? So that's all I had to share with you today. And look at that timing.